Now, I thought I would start off tonight with just a very, very short reading. I'll read for you, just a reading from Judges chapter 6, verses 11 to 16. And as I said, I'll read that for you. You can look it up if you want, but reading with you Judges chapter 6, verses 11 to 16. Now, the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "But I am with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." And I just thought that was a very appropriate reading for us tonight, because we see in there that Gideon, a man who, at least in his own eyes, was a very, very ordinary person. And as we know from our Bible, he went on to defeat the nation of Midian and to free his people. And I think the thing we find often is that when we read about the people in the Bible stories, that they always take on this aura of almost being supernatural. We tend to think that, of course, Moses said that, or David achieved that, or Peter reacted that way. They're special. That's why they're in the Bible. But we forget that they were really just ordinary people doing extraordinary things with the help of an extraordinary God. And of course, we know that God works in the minutiae of everyday life, as much as the momentous. But as frail human beings, it's really much easier for us to appreciate those big things in life. And tonight we're going to be blessed, God willing, to hear 3 stories that they may not be quite biblical in scope, but nonetheless, they're great examples of God visibly working in people's lives. Although I honestly haven't heard them myself, so perhaps I am underselling them. Maybe they are biblical. But tonight, as I said, we've got 3. And to start us off for tonight, I'd like to ask our brother Phil, if you could just take over the Zoom from me now, and if you could share your story with us all.
Thanks a lot, Alistair. It's nice to be with you all this evening. And you're so right when you say ordinary people and extraordinary God, because we look at ourselves individually and we think, sometimes we say, why has God called us? We look at ourselves and say, what have I done that I've got the privilege of being called by God? So I'll just go through how the truth of the gospel came to me. Just a bit of a background. I was born in Hobart quite a few years ago. And this is a quiz for the young people. I was born 70 years and 10 years ago. So that'll let you know what age I'm in. I have 1 sister and 3 brothers, or 2 brothers. We were brought up by our mum, as my dad left us when I was at the age of 6. He left and went to seek his flying career. He's been a pilot all his life. He was a bomber pilot in World War II. He flew the Lancaster and was involved in the bombing of Germany. And he flew the aircraft G for George, which is in the museum in Canberra. Not trying to elevate him, but really to point out that his involvement in my life came later, which led to me finding Florida and eventually marrying Florida. What religion was I? Well, I was supposedly Church of England. The only experience I've had in going to church was we had an aunt and uncle that lived in the country in Hobart, a place called Sorrel, and they had a sheep farm and they also grew crops and so forth. And we used to go there every school holidays. And my Uncle Russ, he was really a dad to me. He taught me a lot of things in life and a lot of things on the farm. And down the road from their house was a little church on the side of the road. And so I used to go there on a Sunday with my aunt and uncle. But the only thing I remember was my auntie sitting there and saying or passing comments on the lady's hat in front of me. So I can't really remember any stimulating sermons that got me excited or involved in religion. I'm hopeless with dates, so I won't give you exact dates. Rely on my sister a lot to remember dates. I started working at the age of 17 as an apprentice electrician, which I worked with my uncle. And weekends, I used to do part-time, I was a part-time ambulance officer. So weekends, Friday nights, I used to go to the station and stay there for a week, for the weekend. I continued that until, unfortunately, I got shot by one of the, wasn't a patient, but a relative of a patient, and that happened in the Royal Hobart Hospital. And that unfortunately ended my ambulance career. And that happened when I was 21 years of age. And soon after that, when I said my dad left at 6, it wasn't until I was around about 17 that we had some contact with him. And after I got shot, he invited me to go to Hong Kong for a holiday. So he flew me up there and I stayed with him and his new wife there and children. And one weekend he said, well, I'll take you to the Philippines. You know, you can spend a few days there and have a look around, of which I did. So he went back and I stayed there for the week. And then I met this lovely Filipino girl and her name was Florida. And so we got on very well. And after I got back to Hobart, we continued to correspond with each other. And then finally, I invited her to come to Hobart, of which she did. And then on the 18th of October, 1973, we got married. Now, Florida was a pretty staunch Catholic. And as I say, I was a so-called Church of England, but I used to go with her to the Catholic Church. And soon after we got married, we were introduced to a family called the Skulls. Brother John Skull, he's up in, I think he's still in Brisbane now, but he had a flat under his house, so we stayed there. Now, I was introduced to John Skull through my brother Stephen. Stephen worked with John, and they worked for A.B. Jennings. So they used to travel a lot and together. And then I got introduced to John Skull. So he offered the flat underneath the house, which we accepted. And then soon after, he started to preach the truth to us. And he used to tell me, he said, well, I had your brother Stephen in the car for at least 2 hours. So he had nowhere to go but to listen to me talk about the Bible. So he started to talk to me about it. I always wondered about life. I thought, well, what's the reason to being alive if ultimately you just die? What's the sense in that? And I used to question, why even be born if the final outcome was that you die? So I always questioned that. And through our talks through John Skull, and just up the road from John and Rhonda Skull lived the Seeleys, Sheila and Henry Seeley. Henry was a blind man, but boy, could he read Braille. And he could talk to me through him translating through his Braille Bible. And eventually I thought, well, this is going somewhere. I'm really interested in what they're putting forward to me. And then I suppose one of the turning points was we had a visit, or the Ecclesia had a visit from Peter Pickering, who spoke about Israel. And that really drew my interest to what they were talking about. I also had a look at a number of religions, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventists, and so forth. And I could see the common theme with them was the Trinity, which I could see what John was presenting, that no way was there a Trinity. So eventually I accepted the truth, but I just look at my notes. And as a result of this, the whole family got interested. And I'm just seeing the sequence there of, so my sister and husband were baptized, followed by my brother, and then I got baptized. One brother, unfortunately, didn't. He wasn't sort of in close to our area, so we didn't have much opportunity. He showed little interest. But I started to talk to Florida about what I learnt and what I thought, the truth was. Now, on Sundays, I used to drop her off at the Catholic Church, and I used to go there too. But once I got interested in the Christadelphians, her church, St Mary's Cathedral, was a block away from the Christadelphians. So I ended up dropping her off and then going there. It caused a lot of conflict in our marriage. It even got to the point where she wanted to leave. She said, how can Christadelphians be right? How many Christadelphians are there compared to Catholics? So I thought, how am I going to get around this? So what I did, every time I went to work, I would leave appropriate leaflets around the house. And as a result, I know that she was reading them. And so she started to talk also to John Skull. And finally, she accepted the truth. My preaching effort with Florida was, she asked me a question one day and said, what about Mama Mary? The Pope tells us about Mama Mary. And I said, well, maybe he kept her in the deep freeze. Well, that went down like a lead balloon. So I discontinued my preaching and left it to more professionals, and ultimately, wonderfully, Florida accepted the truth. And I mean, it was a great turning point in her life and also in mine and their families. And I think one thing that I learned from the Scholes and the Seeleys was personal preaching really gets the results as far as people listening to the truth, because every minute or occasion they had the opportunity, they would drop a word in season, and eventually they worked on it, and we were baptized in 1976. So really, it took a few years, but we got there. And the funny thing was also that once Florida accepted the truth, there was a number of Filipinos who were Catholic, and boy, did she get stuck into them about the Pope and everything else. And then I had to tell her, Florida, you need to calm down, calm down a bit, and, you know, just slowly try to introduce the truth. So that's really the story of how I came into the truth. And when you look at it, you do see that we have an extraordinary God that really calls people that you would think not accept the truth. So thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoyed that story. Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks very much for that, Phil. It's a pity we can't all be with you in the hall so you can see us chuckling away at that picture you painted of Auntie Florida getting stuck into them. Would have been quite a sight to see, I'm sure. Well, thank you again. I think you're on mute. So what I'll do now, though, is we'll transition over to the next presentation we have for tonight. And just want to thank David Brewer. He's actually prepared for us a video, which I'll attempt to stream now. So let's, fingers crossed, I work in IT, so this should work. And I'll share my screen and I'll share my sound. And here we go. So please ping me on the WhatsApp if this isn't working for everyone.
This is the story of two young families emerging out of the Great Depression and the Second World War. Roy and Pauline Taylor were a working class couple living in Percival Street in Preston, and in December 1947 they started a family with the birth of a little boy called Robert. Now my parents, Bert and Nora Brewer, lived in Ellison Street in Preston, and they started their family with the birth of Peter in April 1950. When Robert was 2.5, his mum gave birth to another little boy who she named Adrian in May 1950. Pauline would visit the Preston Maternal Health Centre for weekly and then monthly checkups of her baby's progress. When she was visiting for Adrian's checkup, the bubbly Pauline met up a few times with a very quiet Nora Brewer, who was visiting the centre as well with her baby Peter. Now Pauline had another baby boy, Philip, in November 1951. Nora gave birth to another beautiful baby boy, David, later in November 1951. On visits to the Preston Maternal Health Centre, the two ladies crossed paths on various occasions, and they were surprised to see each other again. Pauline had another baby boy, Gary, in May 1953. And Nora gave birth to another baby boy, John, in April 1953. It was becoming a regular thing for Pauline and Nora to see each other over the years at the health centre, and they became good friends. And the families developed a friendship once Roy and Bert and the little boys came into the picture together. The Taylor family were Christians, as were the Brewers. The Taylors were part of the Christadelphian community, and the Brewers visited the Baptist church. I can remember as a little boy being sent off to Sunday school at the Baptist church by Mum and Dad, and we had to walk a fair way, and they gave us, I think it might have been a penny to put in the collection. And the three boys wandered along the street, got to the milk bar, and we went into the milk bar and spent our collection on lollies before we got to Sunday school. Now, as the boys all grew, they started at the same kinder in Preston. I can remember those days, playing in the playground next to the church with Phil and Charlie and Gary. And we spent many happy times together at the kinder. Now, the Brewers outgrew their house in Preston and moved to a new house in Reservoir, which was very exciting. The Taylors also moved to a bigger house in Reservoir, and the friendship between the families continued to grow with regular family visits between each other's homes. The Taylors eventually moved to Kew, which was a long bike ride from Reservoir for us, but we still had plenty of time together. We even rode our bikes from Reservoir and Kew to Ringwood to fish at Ringwood Lake, and we would catch the little golden carp with our rolled up flour and water bait it was. Who would have thought all the years later that we'd be living out here and have never been fishing at Ringwood Lake since? Bert and Roy would discuss their religious beliefs, and Bert was fascinated with the exact interpretation of the Bible and the teachings held by the Christadelphians, which was so different to the church philosophy that he knew. To Bert, it was a breath of fresh air. Roy suggested he travelled to Queensland with him to a Bible school in 1964. So they did a road trip together for a week of Bible study and friendship with many like-minded people. Now, when Bert came back from Queensland and the Bible school, he was flabbergasted. He was so full of enthusiasm that he had found gold to him. He was in love with the Christadelphians and everything they stood for. He started sending us to Sunday school at Horticultural Hall in the heart of Melbourne. He would attend the memorial meeting, lectures and Bible classes, and it was a full-on transformation of my father. In fact, I have vivid memories of going to Sunday school at Horticultural Hall, which would have started at 9:30 probably, and we used to walk up to the Reservoir station from our house, catch a train all the way into Princess Bridge, into the city, and they were the red Rattler trains. It was very exciting times, something new that we'd never done before. And we were just little kids, not even teenagers. And we would get off the train at Princess Bridge and walk up Russell Street to Horticultural Hall, which was on Victoria Street, and go to Sunday school there. Now, Horticultural Hall, it smelt of stale flowers all the time. When you leave flowers in water for a long time, remember that smell? Well, that's what it smelt like, because they used to do floral displays on a regular basis, and that's the smell that I remember from our Sunday school visits at Horticultural Hall. So the transformation was almost complete for my dad. The only person who was not too impressed with this change in their life was Nora, who didn't want to be a part of it. Dad was baptised in 1964. The friendship between our two families grew and grew and grew. I remember when when we would see each other, either at the Taylor's house or at our house, my dad would bellow out, "Hello, Chief!" And Roy, or Bob as we knew him, always knew him as Bob. I was really surprised when I heard people calling him Roy. He would shout back, laughing, "Hello, Chief!" And that was their greeting to each other every time they saw themselves. They were such exciting times. They were the greatest of times. And it is the Taylor family who eventually brought our whole family into the truth through their love and friendship and introducing us to their way of Christian life. We became a part of the Melbourne Sunday School, and we were known as the boys who would eat all the supper at any gathering. Our young people's activities like league nights at Ringwood Hall were the highlight of our month. And we'd get a chance to play musical chairs and choosing partners with the girls to play jump the mat and other wonderful times. It was so exciting for just little kids that we were. Very exciting times. And even ecclesial camps at Shoreham, just amazing. They contributed to our friendships and our growth in the truth, our understanding of the Bible and learning all our lessons in Sunday school. The greatest influences on me over the years were my awesome and bright Sunday school superintendent, who I'll never forget to this day, Alan Wallace. The most amazing, wonderful, impressive, caring, fun man that I'd ever met. Of course, apart from my dad. Alan Wallace. And my really cool Sunday school teacher, John Eichen. I loved him too. He was so cool, so caring, so humorous with his dry sense of humour. He loved me, and he was so kind to me, and I loved having him as my Sunday school teacher. They were such beautiful role models in living the truth and in being real. That was Alan Wallace, and that was John Eichen. We visited the first Rathmines Bible School in 1965, and then went 3 times a year, clocking up 25 Bible schools in a row. So from the start of Bible schools at Rathmines, we went to the first 25 without fail. Dad set up bunks in the back of our FC station wagon, and they were double-decker bunks. John was up the top. I think Yvonne was up in the back, and Peter and I were on the back seat. And he would drive all night to get to the Bible school. We'd stop at places like Picton, and he'd be out of the car, running around the car, trying to wake himself up so that he didn't fall asleep. And it was probably -5 degrees at Picton on the way up there, which is I think it's in the Blue Mountains. Anyway, somewhere like that. So we visited all those Bible schools. Dad was referred to by everybody as Bible School Bert. And he wanted us to be surrounded by the truth. And we were immersed in gaining an understanding of the Bible. We drove so many times to South Australia and the Glenlock Easter Camp, and formed even more great friendships and further learning about God and his people while we fished, barbecued and dived in the river and camped on the banks of the mighty Murray River amongst the lignums. Now eventually God worked in Mum's life too, as she could see the transformation, an amazing transformation in Dad and the whole family, the whole of our family life. She too was baptised in 1966. It was such a fun, exciting time in my life. I had never experienced before a community of such beautiful people whose lives were centered around God and his wonderful son, Jesus. They were loving, they cared for everyone and everything, and we were welcomed into the community with open arms by all these wonderful people. Now along came the 6-Day War in the Middle East, The 6-Day War had a huge impact on me and many others at that time, and I thought for sure that Jesus was about to return. I was baptised by a wonderful man, Ted Nicol, at the Taylor's house in Kew, along with my lifelong friend Charlie, who was baby Adrian in the early days, and my older brother Peter, and another young man from Perth. On June the 4th, 1967, the 4 of us were all baptised. Now my good friend Phil Taylor, who's Charlie's brother, who's born in the same month as me, he was baptised 2 days later, and the whole 5 of us were all welcomed into fellowship on the following Sunday, on the Sunday morning. They were exciting times, and the truth was so alive in our hearts. Just amazing. Very good times. So we can see from small incidental things in the lives of 2 ordinary women, extraordinary things can happen that nobody could predict or foresee in the future except for our Father in heaven. He has worked in my life, He has worked in my mum and dad's lives, He has worked in our lives to fulfill His plans for us. We all remember with enthusiasm the day and the time surrounding our baptism. And I feel inside I'm still that 16-year-old teenager to this day. The Taylor family were instrumental in bringing all of our family into the truth, in introducing us to the principles of the Bible as understood to be the truth, which they are, without a doubt. Ordinary people, an extraordinary God. We've been taken on a journey of what happened to me and to my family as we were introduced to the truth of God's Word. It's been a wonderful experience. We are so thankful to the Taylor family, to Roy and Pauline, and everything they did and developed within our family to where we are today. And it's just wonderful that God has worked within our lives to bring us into the truth. And we look forward to the kingdom to come very soon on the earth.
There you go. Thank you very much for that, David. I think we just see this recurring theme, don't we, of the importance of relationships and what a blessing they are in our lives. So it's wonderful. Should have just mentioned earlier that God willing, at the end of tonight, we'll have a chance to have a bit of conversation on the Zoom afterwards. So if you just can hold your thoughts and comments till then, there'll be a good opportunity for us all to reflect on that. So I'll move on now, though, to our next presentation for tonight. So looking forward to a little bit of a different sort of story this time. I've been told to warn people that there's a few medical details on this one. So if you're a little bit squeamish or perhaps a bit worried about that, then just be prepared. But I'll ask you to hand over now to Brett and Kerry to share with us their story. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. It's really lovely to be with you. I see a few unfamiliar names on the screen. So it's a long time. I actually grew up at the old Burwood Ecclesia, and many people will know this story, but just for some connection, I'm Kerry Jones. My husband is Brett, and I was Kerry Baum, and my parents are Hedley and Marlene, of whom many of you will be familiar. And many of you might be familiar with the story that I'm about to tell you about our twins' birth. So it was their birthday last month, and every year there's a bit of an unspoken message that passes between Brett and myself of what actually could have happened on this night 22 years ago. So I was 33 years old at the time, and I have a daughter who's just turned 30. I probably should mention my daughter is Courtney Taylor, so that's interesting. It ties along with the story that David gave us. And I realised how young I actually was. I make no apologies that this story needs to include some medical content for context. I will try and keep it fairly sanitised for you. I'll take you through most of the story, and then Brett will take over. And I need to also preface that these are our personal experiences. I think this is really important. I don't believe that we are extra blessed by the outcomes, and I make no judgments to those that have differing stories with more tragic endings. Just I acknowledge that we're grateful for the outcome, even if we're not sure why God worked in this way. So we eagerly awaited the arrival of our twin boys, which was a complete surprise, numbers 4 and 5 to our family. But there were mounting problems, and they were all medical. I had a condition called placenta previa. For those that don't know what that is, it's where one of the placentas sit over the birth canal, so it makes it pretty much impossible to deliver naturally. And it was grade 4, so it was pretty serious. I remember sitting in the consulting suite with my obstetrician, Dr. Chester Yeo, and when he read me the report, he was so concerned that he just sat there and put his head in his hands and sort of put his head back through his hair. And I was fairly chilled about it, not probably realising how serious it was. So I needed to have a caesarean section to overcome the condition. So when I had the pregnancy was largely unaffected by it. I had a good pregnancy. But when I was about 6 weeks to go to my due date, I was hospitalised and monitored. And because I had this particular condition, they took blood from me every week to cross-match to supplies. It's pretty much the only medical condition where they actually put blood away from you in the event of emergency. So I was at Mitcham Private Hospital. It was fairly boring because I didn't have a baby to keep my days sane, but I was in a maternity ward, so there was lots of babies around me. I did have a scare at one point of some blood loss, but nothing came much of it, a trip to radiology to have an ultrasound. The greatest fear for the medical staff was going into early labour. So that was what they were concerned about. One particular day, a nurse came to my room and looking at the collection of books I had very generously loaned to me by many friends, she took my hand, and I remember I was having a pretty rough day this day. And she said, "I see you're a Christian." It wasn't really a question, but she provided great comfort to me at that time. And despite my inquiries to regular nursing staff, I never saw her again, or I never even knew who she was. An angel, I wondered. The caesarean section was set for the 3rd of August, and due to the complications, I would be fully anaesthetised. The plus side of this is that Brett would attend the birth. Our anaesthetist was particularly on board with this, as he had 7 children of his own and was of the firm belief that a parent should witness the birth of their child, or children in our case. The operating theatre was prepared for me as I'm allergic to latex, and we went in around 7-ish of that evening. Before I went under the anaesthetic, they were prepping me and doing all the sorts of last-minute things they do before they put you under. And I looked at my obstetrician who was standing over me, and I said to him, "God be with you." I remember the enormous amount of courage it took for me to say that. And I almost didn't say it, although I don't believe it would have affected the outcome. So I'm currently under a general anaesthetic. So now Brett will take over the story.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Now, I'll just preface this by saying I don't really talk about this too much, and you'll probably understand why, because probably as I start to get through the story a bit, you might see me pause and choke a little bit, but we'll get there in the end. Last time I probably talked about this in public was probably an exhortation at Ringwood, and when I gave that talk, about half the ecclesia was in tears. So yeah. Anyway, Kerry's just gone under her general anaesthetic, and I'm down in the delivery room with the doctors and the anaesthetist, just sitting off to one side. So the twins were born. Caleb was born first at 7:45, and then Blake was born at 7:46. So Caleb's doesn't have Blake on his birth certificate, but Blake has Caleb on his birth certificate. So that's a bit of a funny thing. Both the babies were okay, and the nurses were doing all their normal tests that they do. And then after about 10 minutes, the doctor calmly says, maybe the dad could take the babies up to the nursery. And I walked out. I didn't sort of think too much about it. There was lots of blood on the floor at that point, but there was no indication that we had any problems at that point. So about 8 o'clock, I was up in the nursery and I was there with the babies. We hadn't told the family yet because we hadn't named any of the babies. So I was waiting for Kerry so we could do that. And probably about an hour or so later, I asked the nurses how things were going because we hadn't heard anything for a long time. And it seemed to be taking quite a long time. They just calmly said, look, the doctors are just finishing up. They've just got to make sure everything's okay. And it was probably about another half an hour later. So we're probably about an hour and a half since I'd left the operating theatre. And I was still making some general inquiries or watching the nurses, and I could see them talking and going in and out of the nursery all the time. And they came in and they told me that the doctors wanted to see me. And I asked if Kerry was okay. And they said the doctors will discuss that with you. But they also asked for Kerry's parents to come in as well. So at that point, I rang Headley, or they might have rung Headley, I can't remember now. And Headley arrived, and this was probably about 9:45 that night. Marlene was home. She was looking after Chelsea and Dylan. So the nurses took us into this meeting room, and we waited there for a little while. And they told us that the doctors would be, they were still with Kerry, and but they'd be with us shortly. So I was there just with Headley, and obviously we were just talking about what was happening. And then all of a sudden, from different doors into this room, 2 doctors and an anaesthetist come in, and they told us that Kerry had lost too much blood. She'd gone into hypovolemic shock, and they couldn't bring her out of the anaesthetic. They were going to be transferring her to ICU at Knox, and they wanted to run some more tests, in particular CT scans, etc. They couldn't tell us what the outcome would be, but they did indicate that the loss of blood could have resulted in loss of oxygen blood to the brain, and we would have to wait and see what the outcome was going to be of all that. Then they said that we should go over to Knox so we could be with Kerry where she was being transferred. So at that time, that gave me an opportunity to ring my parents as we were going over. And my mum still remembers the call that she took at about 10 past 10 that night. And the phone, they had their phone in the kitchen, and it actually woke up Courtney. Now, Courtney was 8 years old at this point, so she was staying with my mum and dad. So Dad got ready to drive over to Knox. Obviously, they didn't tell Courtney any of this. Mum just told Courtney that Dad was going out to the supermarket. And Courtney, aged 8, says to my mum, who goes to the supermarket at 10:30 at night. So she was right onto it and wanting to know what was going on. And probably that's Courtney all over, actually. Nothing much has changed there. So now we're about 11 o'clock at night over at Knox. We've arrived. My dad, Barry, has arrived, and we're in the waiting room. We're waiting for test results. And it really is a long wait. And I think we were there till probably after 1 o'clock. And I'd been pacing around the waiting room. Headley and my dad were pretty quiet, just sitting there with me. And at this point, I'd moved out into the corridor, and I can remember just being squatted down in the corridor floor. And I just had my head in my hands and just thinking and praying. And the doctor came down the corridor, and he told me, this was Kerry's doctor, Chester, and he told me that the CT scan looked good and that there didn't appear to be any impact on the brain. So that was good news at that point. And he just said, look, we'll need to just see how she goes overnight. He says, we've still got problems of blood leakage and hemorrhaging, and that's still ongoing. But they said I should go back to Mitcham and stay with the twins for the night over there, because they were over at Mitcham still. So about 2 a.m. I'm back at Mitcham, and I've gone into Kerry's room to sleep, and obviously lots of prayer and those sort of things as you do with that situation. And eventually I fell asleep, but not for long. about 5:30 a.m., a nurse came in and woke me, and I could see the time on the clock. And I knew it was probably an unusual time for her to come in and do that. And I said to her straight away, I said, "It's bad news, isn't it?" And she didn't answer for a bit. And then she said to me, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said to me, "You need to pray." And then we both just looked at each other for a while. And I asked her, "Is it life-threatening?" And she said that the doctor had told her that if I said that, she was to say, yes, it was. So that was about 5:30 or so. Hedley picked me up at about 6:30 a.m. that morning. And we had a prayer in the car on the way over to Knox. And I actually just missed seeing Kerry that morning. They had to take her into theatre. They were trying to hold her out of theatre so I could see her before she went in, but they couldn't wait any longer. They couldn't wait for me, and they had to take her in. She was hemorrhaging. She was losing blood as quickly as it was being put in. She was losing blood, and they had to try and deal with it. So Kerry's obstetrician, Chester, he'd actually called in the main trauma surgeon from the Alfred Hospital. And I actually met him after the surgery was done, and he was actually the surgeon that was in all the TAC ads that were on TV back in those days. So, and yeah, so she went into surgery, and then that's about 7 o'clock that morning and next morning, and I rang my mum to update her, and my mum obviously was particularly concerned over the night because she'd actually lost her mum when she was very young, and she'd been praying, looking for answers. And she told me how she'd opened her Bible at Psalm 119, and she said there was a verse there that she read. Sorry, Psalm 113, and she said there was a verse there that she read, and it was verse 9, and it said there that there was a woman to keep house, and this woman would be a joyful mother of children. Praise ye the Lord. And she said to me, that's the answer she got. And she told me that Kerry would be okay. So Kerry came out of surgery a couple of hours later, so it was about 9:30. She'd been in surgery for all that time. So, and the trauma surgeon came and saw me and Hedley. And very humbly, he came out and told us how he looks after bleeding bits. So, very unpretentious, but he was obviously one of the top surgeons in at the Alfred Hospital. And he told me what they'd done is they'd had to clamp off the 2 large femoral arteries. He said they had no choice to stop the bleeding. So these arteries are about the size of your thumb, so they're very, very large arteries. And he said, look, we don't know what the impact of that's going to be. We don't know whether there's going to be loss of leg use or anything like that with loss of blood to the lower part of the body, and we'll just have to see how that works out. But we had no choice; we had to do that. So I saw Kerry probably later that afternoon back in ICU. She'll mention in a minute. I think she's put back into a coma and just to rest. And so when I saw her in ICU, she was all intubated. She obviously couldn't talk to me, but she did motion that she wanted me to give her a pen and paper. So she actually wrote a friend's name down and their mobile number. So at that point, I knew that she was going to be okay, hopefully. So, and at her 50th birthday, I in a speech I gave there, I remember saying that when Hezekiah asked for extra years, God granted him 15 extra years. And I said at her 50th back then that, well, so far God's given me an extra 16 years with her. And so far I've had the extra 22 years. So we thank God for that. Kerry's got some bits that she'll finish up with.
Okay, so as Brett said, I was placed into an induced coma, and I woke up in Knox Private in the intensive care unit where I was transferred by ambulance. I remember many times that the nurse would say, you know, press my hand if you can hear me, before probably, I reckon, and I think they did their obs maybe 10 or 20 minutes apart. And it was about 3 times she said that before I could actually do it. I was in ICU. I was a bit of a star of ICU. They weren't used to having young people in ICU, especially young people that had babies visit them once a day. So the twins did visit me most days, and a big shout out to my sister Vicky, who will be known to a lot of you, for the help she gave Brett in those early times bathing. She gave the twins their first bath along with my sister-in-law Andrea. Yeah, and I was able to have some bit of body bonding. I breastfed them as well. So I had lots of visits. When I went back, I had visits actually from the theatre staff. This is pretty unusual, but the theatre staff came and visited me because it had such an the outcome was unexpected. I should have died. I really should have died, and they knew what they were seeing was an absolute miracle. I breastfed the twins for over 12 months, which is amazing considering the blood loss. Now, I never say I lost a lot of blood. I actually had replaced 25 units of blood. So your body generally, the average body has about 12 units travelling around in it at any one time, 10 to 12. And I had 25 units replaced. So that's phenomenal. It's a double oil change, really. So, and a unit is about a pint, I believe. My recovery was pretty rough for about 12 months. You know, I'd been opened up twice, had major arteries redirected, gone into hypovolemic shock. If you don't know what that is, that's when you lose more than 20% of your blood and your major organs start shutting down. And I had messages from around the world, including cards from whole ecclesias, due to a call out for prayer that went out via Rob Hyman on a very early genesis of social media. So for those my similar age, you might remember Yahoo groups where you could have discussion forums, and there was a Christadelphian discussion forum, and a whole prayer link chain went out on that. Very early genesis of social media, I guess. Anyway, so that is our story. And in some ways, it's just part of the story of the twins, as when Caleb was 13 months old, he underwent open heart surgery. But that's another whole God-filled story. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Kerry, and Brett, on sharing something which is obviously so personal and difficult, but also wonderful at the same time. So appreciate very much that and all of us, all of the contributors tonight. Thank you very much. At this point, as I mentioned earlier, we will transition over in a second to just some discussion. But before that, I've just got an announcement. Simon, I believe you're on the Zoom. Would you like to just share an announcement that you have for something coming up soon?
Hello, Brother Alistair. Yes, I've got my screen. Can you give me access for the screen share?
Let me just give me a second. My 9-year-old daughter is telling me how to.
Yeah, now he can.
Yeah, you should be able to already according to this.